So our lesson this week, of course, is persecuted but not forsaken in the life of Paul. This is day 2 in this week's lesson. The title is Paul, the Prisoner of Jesus Christ. Philippians and Colossians are called prison epistles because they were written while Paul was in prison. The others are Ephesians and Philemon. Most commentators think they were written while Paul was in Rome, which is about AD 60 to 62. See Acts 26:16. Now, we're told in the lesson to read Ephesians 3:1 and Philemon chapter 1. I'll read Ephesians 3:1 here. You can come back and read Philemon chapter 1 if you like. And it says, "For this cause, I, Paul, the prisoner of Jesus Christ, for you Gentiles." It's an interesting statement, don't you think? So we have, the question is, in the lesson guide, is what is the significance of how Paul characterizes his imprisonment? This is a chance for you to pause the video and answer that question for yourself. Continuing, Paul has given his life in service to Jesus Christ. Okay, so if that service includes being a prisoner, he is ready. Paul described himself as an ambassador in chains. Ephesians 6:20. He had been on missionary journeys, raising up churches and training workers for the Lord. He may have asked, "Why am I here when I could be doing so much more without these chains?" Paul was also in prison later when he wrote 2 Timothy, which is considered a pastoral epistle. So at least 5 books of the New Testament were written while he was in prison. In none of the prison epistles does Paul mention exactly where he was in prison. Thus, some have suggested either Ephesus or Caesarea, but there is no biblical evidence that Paul was ever in prison in Ephesus. Caesarea might be a more likely possibility, except there is no apparent threat to Paul's life in this city. There definitely is that threat, however, by the time Philippians was written. See Philippians 1:20 and Philippians 2:17. The epistle gives us some other clues as to where Paul was at the time of his imprisonment. First, there was a praetorium. This can refer to a provincial governor's official residence, like the one in Jerusalem, where Jesus was examined by Pilate, Matthew 27:27 and John 8:33. And in Caesarea, where Paul was in prison, Acts 23:35. But Paul clearly uses this term not of a place, but in reference to people. He says the whole palace guard became familiar with the gospel, Philippians 1:13. In Rome, there were elite soldiers, about 14,000, who protected the emperor and guarded his prisoners. Second, Paul also sends greetings from the believers in Caesar's household, Philippians 4:22. This indicates that Paul was in prison in Rome and in contact with those who served the imperial household. So the question to end our lesson today, how do we learn to make the best of whatever tough situation we find ourselves in? And why is that not always easy to do? So this is your thoughts for today. After we've read the lesson, take with you today those 2 questions. Ponder those questions. Think on those questions. How do we learn to make the best of whatever tough situations we find ourselves in? And why is that not always easy to do? Tomorrow, we will look at our next lesson, the next part of this week's lesson, Paul in Chains.